Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Reimagining Communal Spaces to be More Community Friendly, brought to you by the Connecticut Main Street Center. I'm Christine Schulke, I'm our Communications and Strategy Director. And before we begin the presentation, just a couple quick words. So Connecticut Main Street Center is the expert resource for developing and sustaining vibrant downtowns and main streets that fuel our state's prosperity. Our mission is to assess, educate, convene, and advocate to develop and grow downtowns. We're grateful to our sponsors and funding partners. Our founding sponsor is Eversource and the Connecticut Department of Economic and Community Development. And our growth sponsors are Avangrid and the Connecticut State Historic Preservation Office. Our educational programs, the Main Street Forums for the 21st Century, are sponsored by Webster Bank and Avangrid. And we have thanks for our corporate investors, Penn Globe and Capital for Change. And then in addition, we also have important strategic partnerships, including our partnership with FHI Studio, who is our AICP certification maintenance provider. So as a reminder to planners, this webinar is approved for 1 CM credit. So please make sure that you go do what you need to do to get that credit afterwards. And then a couple of quick housekeeping notes. Today's webinar is about 1 hour, and I know that a lot of you submitted questions in advance that Celeste will be addressing during her presentation, but if other questions come up that you have during the webinar, please do put them in the chat box. We'll be monitoring that, and we'll be answering as many as possible at the end. At the close of the presentation, you will also be directed to an evaluation survey. Please do take a moment to fill that out because we really do take your feedback into consideration when developing future programming. And a lot of times people want to know if the recording will be made available of the presentation. And afterwards, we will be sending out links to both of those with a recap of today's webinar. Oops. So at Connecticut Main Street Center, we believe that vibrant, sustainable main streets are developed around these 6 core components: a unique sense of place, economic vitality, community engagement, and policies that support appropriate growth, equitable places and inclusive practices, sustainable practices and protection of our natural resources, and connectivity with a focus on multimodal transit. So today's topic on reimagining public spaces is at the intersection at a lot of these different areas, including sustainability, inclusiveness, place, and economic vitality. And with that, I'm very excited to introduce our speaker today, Celeste Frye. An AICP-certified planner, Celeste is co-founded Public Works Partners more than a decade ago out of a passion to help mission-driven organizations increase their positive impact on local communities. She's a known expert in designing and implementing multi-stakeholder initiatives, building strong connections across the nonprofit, government, and private sectors. She's a member of Regional Plan Association's Connecticut Committee and the Coro New York Leadership Center's Alumni Advisory Board. She is recognized with City and State's 2021 Community Engagement Power 50 and Crain's New York's 2021 Notable Women Business Owners. She received her master's in regional planning from Cornell University and a BA in International Studies and French from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So with that, I will turn it over to Celeste. Welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Christine, and welcome to everyone. That was a really kind introduction. We're just getting our deck up, and I want to start by thanking the Connecticut Main Street Center, Christine, Judith, and everyone for having us today. We're really excited to be here, and thank you to my team member Ava Lopez, who is doing our screen share. And please, if everyone could just take a moment to introduce yourselves in the chat as I begin my presentation and introduce myself. I'd love to hear where folks are coming from. Just looking at it now. David and I have known each other a long time, so I'm happy to see you here, David. Thank you. I see Joanna from Naugatuck Valley COG. We've got some folks from Eastline Parks and Rec, the Mansfield Downtown Partnership. I think you'll be excited to see some of the photos we've tried to grab you. Some of them will look familiar. Marcia from Penn Globe. Oh, I'm really interested to get the manufacturing perspective on what we're talking about. Great. So thank you all so much for being here today. As Christine so kindly introduced me, I am the CEO of a firm called Public Works Partners. We are based in New York City, but we work regionally and across the country. We have been around now for more than a decade, but we started out primarily as management consulting and economic development consulting, and we have been growing our urban planning practice over the last about 5 years. We work with firms like FHI and Stantec and other firms that you know well and probably work with all the time in your jobs here in Connecticut. We have done some work for the city of Waterbury and also quite a bit in New Rochelle and other Westchester and Hudson Valley towns as well. So we're always happy to learn more about Connecticut places too. I am actually a resident of Stamford and a big supporter of our local downtown special services district and our Mill River Park and our other downtown and local communal spaces. And I have learned a lot. You know, I spent many years prior to moving to Stamford in New York City. And, you know, the way I think that we approach communal spaces in large cities versus more suburban, medium-sized cities versus smaller towns can be different and really exciting. Just a little bit more about Public Works. We're a certified woman-owned business and a certified disadvantaged business enterprise with the federal government. We're not certified in Connecticut because, as far as we can tell, you have to be headquartered in Connecticut to be certified here. But if anyone has a different perspective on that, let me know. So we're a mission-driven urban planning and management consulting firm. As I mentioned, we work in New York City, across the New York metro region, and also nationally. And if we could actually just go on to the next slide. Today, we are going to talk about our public space work and your public space work, and some tips, tools, and elements that make for great community-friendly communal spaces. We are using the idea of communal spaces somewhat expansively. We'll talk about this more, but that could be a park, that could be a street, that could be a plaza, or just a general gathering area. You know, many of us are lucky enough in Connecticut to have waterfronts as part of our towns and cities. So that can be an important communal space as well. What are communal spaces? We're going to talk about that in section 1. In section 2, we're going to talk about some of the tools and methods you can use in your own communities to make your communal spaces friendlier to all the members of your community. And then we'll talk through in section 3 some real life examples from our work at Public Works Partners. And then we'll have time for questions and answers. This photo is from Mansfield. I think we have someone from Mansfield, a little shout out on the call today. All right, so let's dive in. First, I actually want to start with a question. So where do people congregate in your community? If you could just throw something in the chat, I think it'd be really fun to see. You know, I know in Stamford we have great parks where people like to congregate and do all kinds of different, you know, either passive or active leisure activities. But we have communal spaces along our waterfront where people really love to gather to fish and to cast off in kayaks or small fishing boats at some of our public water access points. I see library and parks. Yeah, we also have a public plaza in front of our library in Stamford, which is a great place for free Wi-Fi and grabbing a coffee. And we also have you know, public speaking and protest both in front of our library and also in front of our town hall. Those are safe spaces for First Amendment rights. Let's see, I'm seeing a shopping center. That's an interesting one. Would love to hear more about that. On Main Street, which is also a state highway, that's a challenging one. because we're hearing a lot about traffic issues and pedestrian and bike harm along our state highways. So that one can be challenging. The Fairfield Hills campus, I think I might have been to a carnival in Newtown at the Fairfield Hills campus. So agreed, that's a fantastic gathering place. And senior centers, thank you. These are all really great and creative communal spaces that I hope you have in mind as we talk through. The idea of where people congregate in your community is a question that we need to approach with sensitivity to all the different kinds of people that live in our communities. It has repercussions and differences in terms of your residents, in terms of their class, in terms of their race and ethnic background, and in terms of their ability to access spaces. So we really want to just put that front and center and address issues of equity and access in this conversation so that we ensure that when we're making community-friendly public spaces, that they are truly welcoming and inclusive of all the members of our communities. So the concept of a community is complex. And so, there are complexities to creating community-friendly communal spaces. We're going to talk first about what a communal space is. This particular photo is from Pratt Street in Hartford. Clearly there was a community dance going on, which is a really fun one. So what is the purpose of these communal spaces? I'm sure we all have a general idea of what communal spaces, how they serve our communities, but the purpose to us of a community-friendly communal space is to be activated, to be active places that invite people in to gather and connect. What's activation? From an urban planning perspective, we consider activation to be the use of public space to advance community building and social interaction. It doesn't have to be an exercise class. It could just be like the Wi-Fi or tables and chairs to encourage folks to gather. It's using strategies to bring people into spaces and encourage interaction and community building in a proactive way. It could include inviting food trucks to the space or holding pop-up concerts, or in this example, a flea market, or public permanent seating or public art. We're going to discuss these different types of activities and the elements that support them, while also, again, keeping in mind accessibility and inclusiveness in these types of activations. It's important to acknowledge that there is a variety of spaces that may serve different communities within your neighborhoods and cities. And those communities may define themselves along, racial, ethnic, class, gender, and ability lines, many of which can be intersectional. And we want to be conscious, again, and proactive about including all those types of groups. Some communal spaces feel hostile to different groups, such in particular, those who are unhoused, or if there are communal spaces that are inaccessible to those with different abilities. And those are questions that I really welcome. And I think we all need to be thinking about, again, people who are unhoused are still part of our communities, and we need to find ways to help everyone feel both welcome, but also safe in spaces. So that's why today I'm going to be discussing multiple elements and tools that you can use to ensure that your communal space is inclusive, equitable, and welcoming. Before we talk about those elements, let's talk about the benefits of communal spaces so we know what positive outcomes we're trying to build towards. Community-friendly communal spaces are multifaceted and offer a variety of benefits. But three that we like to draw out are: they build social network. They set the scenes for people to build their social networks within communities. They enable a space to support economic growth, both in that space and in nearby communities. And they also can provide health benefits by facilitating physical and social activity within the space. So we're going to break down each one of those in turn. Building social networks. Communal spaces enable us to build social networks because they provide infrastructure and a setting in which people can gather, communicate, and share experiences. They create spaces for people to comfortably and safely interact with others in their community who they may not see on a day-to-day basis, who may not be their immediate neighbors, right? But people's natural tendency is often to gather with those that they are most similar to. Again, along all the different ways that our communities break down, including what we've talked about, but also religious affiliation, gendered identity, numerous other ways in which we define our own identities. We want to support people's ability to gather and feel safe and enjoy what they're doing. And we also want to encourage that kind of inclusivity and mixing of different types of people that really makes for vibrant communities. For example, we want to intentionally incorporate accessibility into our planning so that all communal spaces can cultivate those various benefits. Everyone feels welcome and no one feels that they are discriminated against. An increase in residents and visitors in a communal space can also spur economic growth within that space, but also in the surrounding community. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. They can spur this type of economic growth through how the spaces are designed and how use improvements are put in place, which can then enable folks to engage in local commercial activity and enable local businesses to thrive. Different types of infrastructure, from it could be a brick and mortar store, it could be facade improvements along a street or a communal space. It could be providing a venue for food trucks. All these things can enable small businesses to have more space to conduct business and meet community residents. Popular communal spaces can also draw people into different neighborhoods where they can contribute to wider economic activity across that neighborhood. There's also, an element, certainly in Connecticut, of many older structures and elements of infrastructure that have been built across the centuries that our state has been settled. And one way of spurring economic activity in a communal space is through adaptive reuse of those spaces, which can improve the quality of space and also give it a purpose that reflects the community that is currently there. Some common examples of economic activity in communal spaces include pop-ups, markets, flea markets, food trucks, farmers markets. Specifically, there is Elm Debate Hall in New Haven, which is now a space that college students use, but it was formerly a boarding house. Another adaptive reuse in East Haven, a local high school that had been vacant, was turned into a low carbon community for seniors. So we can rethink these spaces as our communities and neighborhoods evolve and use those adaptively in ways that are greener and more current and inclusive. The third benefit we wanted to bring up is improvements to health and well-being. So this can include the very clear things like parks that have sports fields or walking trails, or publicly owned land that could have hiking trails and paths through it, playgrounds, but it also can include commercial downtowns. They allow for movement and mobility that can better both our physical and mental health. So your space may be designed for recreation and play, or it may be designed more for commercial activity, but you can use design elements that promote movement and traversability. And this really, I think, aligns very well with CT Main Street Center's key components of making sure that there is, the ability to be active and move through spaces, which can really improve people's experience in the space. When you're planning for this, one of the great things to think about is if the space has historically lacked that kind of infrastructure needed to promote health and well-being, like wide sidewalks, protected bike lanes, public transit access. Plan for how the interest of community health and well-being can become incorporated into your future planning projects. So those are the three primary benefits that we wanted to lift up. Now we wanted to talk about some common examples of communal spaces. I mentioned this at the beginning, but I think some that occur to many people are parks. Parks allow for many different types of activity, exercise, playgrounds, green space for enjoying nature. They can beautify, they can help our communities be more resilient. They can provide flood protection. They can provide protection against climate change, whether it's mitigating heat or supporting biodiversity within our communities. Markets are another one. Markets are fantastic because they can allow us to do more pop-up uses. If you have access to an empty parking lot or a vacant lot that perhaps used to be a building, you can utilize those spaces to pop up a market with food trucks or a farmer's market or craft fairs, all types of markets that can activate that space, which gives small businesses, particularly those without dedicated storefronts, to have a way to access both their immediate community and a wider constituency of potential clients. Downtowns. Our downtowns are crucial communal spaces. They represent both public and private investment in our communities, and they play an important role in the long-term health of the community. Downtowns are not just retail spaces, of course. They are also spaces for government uses, courthouses, cultural activities, libraries, but also for parades, markets, historic buildings, religious gathering, and even increasingly housing in many of our downtowns. That particular photo is from downtown Mystic, which I'm sure if you don't live there, you may have visited and have seen how vibrant that downtown can get with both residents and tourists. These kind of examples look different in every community, but there are elements that can transform a communal space into one that is more community friendly and a place of lively activity. Let's look at some of those elements that we believe transform communal spaces into ones that are truly community friendly. So here at Public Works, we believe that a better world starts with better neighborhoods. We believe in activating spaces using good urban design by incorporating these key elements of accessibility above and beyond ADA compliance, active transportation even into and through spaces, green space, and safety and comfort. We'll walk through each of those elements to think about how each of those elements help yield the benefits that we talked about before. So first, we're going to talk about accessibility. It's key that a conversation around accessibility is present from the beginning stages of planning a project, not at the end. In this set of tools that we're going to talk about, we're going to build on this rendering. That you're seeing on your screen now. I want to be super clear. This is not a real place. It's a rendering, and it's just kind of a fun way of illustrating these elements of how to make a space, in this case, a fairly wide downtown street that already has a wide sidewalk, to make it more community friendly and hopefully lively and activated. As most of us probably know, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, set forth expectations about how buildings and public spaces should be designed to accommodate limited mobility. The ADA was primarily focused on issues of physical mobility and physical access. So it's important at this point that we really go beyond that, because our community's range of abilities is more complex than what is defined just in the ADA. We want to broaden our understanding of accessible design, also known as universal design, particularly in kind of the architecture and interiors world, so that spaces account for all the possible use cases, including physical ability, mental and cognitive ability, and different kind of life cycle levels of ability as well. Here's some best practices, thanks to our friends at the American Society of Landscape Architects. One is legible signage, clear and understandable design with legible multi-sensory signals and signs. I think the crosswalk sign is an example of a well-known sign that works well for both drivers, bikers, and pedestrians, right? Delineate between places of movement versus places of more passive activity, so people can know what the function of a space is supposed to be. Use multi-sensory navigation, so auditory, especially when you have things like crosswalks. It can be very helpful for people who are vision impaired to have auditory signals at stoplights and crosswalks. Haptic, which is touch-based. Braille is a classic example, but you can have other types of haptic navigation. Textural, bold prints, italics, captions. All these cues can aid in people finding their way through your space. Make sure that design and wayfinding is predictable. Use a consistent set of design cues to increase comfort and safety as folks move through your space. And speaking of moving through, traversability, wide sidewalks, bicycle lanes, and particularly making access continuous. You know, we've all driven in a bicycle lane that just suddenly ends or becomes sharrows, or we've all kind of seen a curb cut that then maybe didn't properly connect to a proper crosswalk, for example. So we want to make sure that shops, restaurants, roads, and medical facilities are all accessible through traversable wayfinding so that people can independently, move through and live their lives. This type of accessibility is crucial for creating community-friendly communal spaces because it creates an equitable opportunity for people to participate in that communal life. I am lucky enough that my physical abilities have been pretty standard throughout my life. But when I had young children and had strollers and toddlers and things like that, I became much more almost hyper aware of accessibility needs because I really needed those curb cuts and well signed and protected crosswalks and wide sidewalks to be able to move through my own city with small people who were not so mobile at that point. So that's just an example of how through our life cycle, we all have experiences where we have differing levels of mobility and accessibility needs. So next, we want to talk about the ways in which people in a community travel. We want to talk a little bit about active transportation, and we're going to go to the next rendering. So active transportation is an important step in activating a space because it gives people more ways to travel to critical destinations. A community-friendly communal space has protected bike lanes to increase safety and reduce the likelihood of injuries. It has bike racks and bike parking, and it also has protected public transit access. In this particular example, we've got a bus lane that's functioning to also protect the bike lane. And both of those are separate from car transportation through the use of lane signage, bollards, and islands as well. This is important because it creates connected communities and can even cost less than infrastructure that just is focused on maintaining motorized traffic. Now we want to think a little bit about green space. So this is a little unusual because, again, this is a street. So green space might be more about the visual enjoyment of green rather than the ability to really use this green space. But A community-friendly communal space utilizes the natural environment to provide opportunities for recreation, play, and learning. You want to thoughtfully plan for and maximize green space, but in accordance with community wants and needs as well. Strategically identify where you place green space and envision what it will be like to actually occupy the space. And trees are great, and we like them in these renderings, but if you don't have space for trees in ways that will enable the trees to grow and be healthy through their life cycle, you might want to focus on planters, for example, or other smaller scale bushes, ways of introducing green to your communal spaces. Then the last element I want to talk about is important for making your communal space approachable and a place where people can relax. This is safety and comfort. We believe in utilizing design to promote safety and comfort so that infrastructure is welcoming and accommodating. You can make a space more community friendly by using things like awnings on storefronts to provide shade or protection from rain as people walk. Trees, which can also provide both shade and protection. Street lights at a community and pedestrian friendly scale to promote safety later in the day and after dark. Slower speed limits also promote pedestrian safety. Also both permanent and movable street furniture and seating. So those are the 4 elements that we see as really key to making a communal space community friendly. Now we're going to talk about kind of tactics to make it happen. So you've heard about the benefits of communal spaces. You've heard about the key elements to building a communal space. Now we're going to talk about, okay, so you've got your pen and your paper or your spreadsheet. How do you actually set about thinking through, researching, planning, implementing, and then managing a community-friendly communal space? All right, so first, when you're making it happen, you want to begin by doing research. This was a really fun research project that we did on 14th Street in New York City, where we were doing a survey with pedestrians and also business owners to understand how they use the street and how they wanted to access the street as it became a priority bus street at that point. Research the history of the neighborhood, how the community may be changing. Are there significant new developments either happening or in the works? What are the demographics and socioeconomic makeup of the community? And why do you want to do this project? Why is it happening here? Why is it happening now? And use that research to help you define what well-being looks like at the community level. Ask questions, talk to your community, observe use patterns. Who uses the space now? Is it used more by different groups? If so, why? Are people using the space currently in ways that it may not have been originally designed for? One of my favorite examples of that is, a concrete plaza that has been adopted by skateboarders who are activating and livening up the space and are an important part of your community. They may not make some pedestrians or older people in particularly always feel safe because they move quickly, but you want to think about, like, how are people using the space and how can you accommodate those different types of uses? Once you have a robust set of information, you can create a plan for how you're going to put together a project. Your plan lays out your goals, your strategies, the timeline, and how you will measure success. It confirms your public rationale and your goals for your project. It defines your strategies and your timeline, and it's an opportunity to incorporate the community into your planning and implementation process by building transparency and accountability in. Establish how and when changes will be made. Establish a timeline for any construction or physical changes that will be made, and make sure that you get the word out about those types of changes, whether that be with your planning board, with your Parks and Recreation board, and ideally with the wider public as well. It's important to do this up front, and also build metrics for success into your project through surveys, administrative data that you're collecting. Those use surveys will help you establish benchmarks to then set goals against and measure yourselves to see if you're getting them. So then once you've made your plan for your project, you want to implement your project. Utilize the connections that you've made with your community members and your businesses to create some shared decision-making frameworks. Bring people into your implementation. You probably need a contractor to make big physical changes, but you might be able to take people on site tours as you're implementing a project. You may be able to engage community groups in group planting projects, for example. And then also there's always the classic ribbon cutting, which can be a really nice way to bring both elected appointed officials, but also the wider community into your process and get people excited about it. Establish clear and accessible lines of communication so that feedback and issues can get up to those of you who are actually implementing the projects around issues like construction and noise and access. You want to make sure that you're getting that feedback during implementation so that you can respond to it. Downtown and public plaza managers are often really the masters of this. So if there are particular pieces about implementing these projects that you want to put in the chat to share with me and with others, that can be incredibly helpful. And will end up being, I believe, part of the recording as well. And yes, Judith is agreeing with me on that. So the next step is going to be to manage and then maintain your space. Sometimes I think urban planners often think about that longer term management and Main Street folks, but sometimes our elected officials and our boards forget that even if they have allocated and put together funds and grants to build out a new space, there are still needs over the long term to manage and maintain that space. So active management will help you continuously improve a site, help to ensure that the site is maintained and is able to meet its potential. You have the ability to assign roles for who's going to manage sites, discuss ongoing funding needs, implement evaluation strategies by collecting ongoing information, who's using the site, how often, what times of day are things being used, where are there tweaks you might be able to make to continuously improve your space through an adaptation framework. Over time, this management process will provide insights to support the ongoing maintenance of your space and also your next project as well. So let's talk next about maintaining your space. Usage and weather can wear down physical infrastructure, green infrastructure, and ultimately make a space less accessible, right? So think about what's needed on a seasonal basis, on an annual basis, and even on 5- and 10-year timelines to be able to continually collect and analyze data and actively maintain your space. Apply the learning from what the metrics and observations that you're making and report out on your findings to keep your community updated on accomplishments of spaces and also ongoing challenges. Using these elements and tactics around planning, implementing, managing, and maintaining your spaces, you can turn your communal spaces into ones that have lively activity and grow into a hallmark of the community. Now, I'm going to spend about 5 minutes sharing 2 brief real-life examples from our work at Public Works Partners. And then I hope to keep, that last 10 to 15 minutes for question and answers. If you have a question along the way, well, first, I want to say, who is planning for a real life space right now? Anything that is in the works? I'm going to go over to the chat to see. No one has shared one yet. But I did see a few. Oh, wow. Someone has a canal trail and brewing company in their space. Jennifer, that sounds amazing. And Leslie was talking a little bit about baseball and soccer fields as places where people gather. I know that's kind of the place to be on weekend mornings in my in Stanford for sure. So Madison is transforming a historic school into a community center. That's really exciting. And we've got someone else who's transforming a former elementary school into community centers. That's very exciting. All right, so 2 quick examples. So we, in the past year, have been part of a team that worked in the city of Syracuse, New York, on a downtown revitalization initiative. The Downtown Revitalization Initiative, or DRI, is a New York State program that awards $10 million in state funding to everyone from small towns to large cities to do neighborhood transformation projects. And the way that the project works is, first, the municipality receives a planning grant to then choose a set of projects and build them out a little bit. And then they receive the $10 million in capital funding to actually implement those projects. So as part of the planning project in Syracuse, Public Works, and along with several other consultants, worked to reconnect 2 different parts of downtown Syracuse. One is the sort of classic business district, reconnecting that area to what is known as the Southwest Gateway area of downtown Syracuse. And the hope was to work against the lasting impacts of both population decline, and the legacy of urban renewal. It was an explicit effort to reconnect these different parts of the city. This particular photo is from Syracuse Arts Week. So then if we can go to the next slide. So as part of this work, the Public Works team facilitated a group of charrettes in person, but also some virtual outreach in this neighborhood in the southwest part of downtown Syracuse. We very much focused these conversations around interventions that the public had already kind of brought up as what mattered to them, which was pedestrian-friendly streets, trees and green infrastructure, and also making streetscape and building improvements, but that would also preserve the cultural heritage of this part, this largely Black part of downtown Syracuse. They didn't want to lose that. There's also a railroad bridge underpass that was perceived as very dangerous by folks. And so they really wanted to generate ideas to activate that underpass and make it feel safe and welcoming for people to traverse between the Southwest Gateway and downtown. So our final recommendations were, if you go to the next one, were to promote the accessibility of critical destinations by improving sidewalks and streetscapes, by adding lighting, and also by adding wayfinding, to redevelop a set of properties to maximize the utilization of some vacant or outdated structures, to create some additional commercial activity and pedestrian activity. And all of those in part to support one more to support the development of some outdoor vendor spaces and pop-up markets. Again, all with the goal of increasing pedestrian activity and pedestrian safety. What were some of the lessons that we learned from this project? It was really important to use mixed engagement methods. We did some in-person, we did some paper and phone-based surveys. We also did virtual outreach and engagement to really meet everyone where they were. We tried to build on what was already working in this neighborhood. Residents were able to easily identify elements that they liked in their community and wanted to build on those. For example, there was a fantastic community center in this neighborhood that they wanted to put more resources into that facility and build on that as well. You know, most communities actually don't want to necessarily reject investment. It's not necessarily a investment versus no investment or no development, but they're interested in investments that contribute to positive trends, but that fit with their own community self-image. So for example, an initial thought from the city of Syracuse was that this community might benefit from having a microbrewery food market type setup. But actually what this community was very clear about is that they wanted to revitalize a beloved former restaurant and lounge that had closed, and they wanted to bring back that type of nightlife that mattered more to their community. So one more example. I don't know if anyone has done work around redesigning streets or putting together street diets, but New York City in 2021 decided to put together a citywide New York City streets plan. We worked with a firm called Sam Schwartz Engineering that some of you may know to manage the public engagement process to help New York City residents think about how they use their streets. In most of our towns and cities, the majority of the publicly owned space is actually our streets. And rather than just skipping over our streets and thinking about how we activate our public spaces, let's incorporate our streets into our public spaces and think about how we use them for the benefit of all of our community members, not just our car drivers and even public transit users, right? The purpose of the streets plan was to prioritize safety for all street users, the use of multimodal mass transit, the reduction of emissions, and also improving access for people with disabilities. So in order to get there, we wanted to come up with, again, multiple ways of engaging with people. New York City is a very large city, as we all are aware. And so we had to get really creative in running a series of virtual workshops, a significant online engagement platform with a survey, but also games. But we also did a phone survey specifically targeted to speakers of other non-English speakers and residents of neighborhoods that had lower rates of participation in the survey and workshops that we had already done to date. By using a variety of methods, you're able to have deep reach into the community. And if we can go to the next slide, some of our lessons learned from this work was we defined the accessibility needs for both the engagement process and for the streets plan overall really early in the process to make sure that everything we were doing aligned to maximizing accessibility for people. We provided a lot of flexibility around the times when we were enabling people to engage. And we did a mix of large group, individual, and small group conversations so that everyone felt comfortable participating. So in summary, we believe that community-friendly communal spaces build social networks, create economic growth, and improve health and well-being. Our elements to help you get to those benefits include providing for accessibility, green space, active transportation, and safety and comfort. If you hit all 4 of those elements, you're going to create great communal spaces. And then finally, it's crucial to build and maintain your space and assess your impact to allow for continuous improvement and learning. So with that, we have 9 minutes for questions and answers. And I just want to say thank you for listening. I may go over to the chat, but Judith, I don't know if you have, Judith or Christine, if you have questions that were submitted in advance.
Yeah, so we didn't have too many come into the chat box right yet, but people still have the opportunity to include those. And I had a question because I really enjoyed your presentation and thinking so comprehensively about our communities and communal spaces. And I actually think I learned a new word today, haptic, which I did not know before about like touch cues. But you know, I think some of these things really came to the fore during COVID. And our first executive director, John Simone, used to tell the story about just getting some cheap, colorful Adirondack chairs and putting them out. And it came to mind when you were talking about like one of the purposes of the space is to create social interactions. And I think something as simple as putting out Adirondack chairs is a great place to start. And so that's actually my question for you is for somebody that maybe has an area in mind, what would you recommend to them as a first starting point? Because it sounds like it doesn't have to be some big expensive thing, but it can actually be something as simple as chairs.
Yes, chairs are huge. Chairs make a space look friendlier, especially if you use colorful ones. Chairs are also street furniture that can be movable. And in a lot of conversations that I've had with business improvement districts and Main Street, movable street furniture can really help people feel more comfortable and safe. Because say, for example, if you have a small group of women who want to have their lunch in a public space, they can drag chairs over closer together to be able to kind of group themselves and be and have their lunch. So I think chairs serve both as visual and they serve as visual cues of welcoming and friendliness. They also serve as safety and comfort elements. One thing I would say is that they have to be maintained and they don't last for very long, especially if they're left out in the weather, in our not always beautiful Connecticut weather. So you do have to plan for maintenance and replacement when you're using that kind of movable street furniture.
Yes, and that's the nice part is that they are pretty low cost. So if you do have to replace them kind of quickly, it's generally not going to break the bank. Right. We did have a couple questions come in. So Lisa is asking, how do you handle the lack of public transportation to get to your community site? Their shoreline buses only runs only down BPR, but if you are in another part of town, you can't get there. So do you have recommendations for like transportation connections?
That's probably beyond the scope of what we can talk about today, but it's a great question. And I think that one thing is, so if you do have shoreline buses that run, it sounds like maybe just from downtown to the shoreline, which is definitely what happens in Stamford. I think that just publicizing their existence can help people. What I see, what I often see is, even if we have shoreline buses, they get very little use because people just don't know that they're there. But it can save on parking and time if people take the bus. So I think publicizing the buses are there. When you're doing events, when you're trying to just make sure that people know. So that way, if they can at least get downtown, then they can hop on a bus. And I think in many of our communities right now, buses are still free, right? So that it actually is a great opportunity for cities to capitalize on that free, on that subsidized bus buses to try to get people onto our public transit while they're free, and then hopefully they'll keep riding even if tickets and costs come back. Any chance of the town negotiating with the bus company to offer an additional routes? Yeah, especially in season, right? Like, could you bump up? Could you offer a few more, beach buses just during the summer season? Danbury, lots of empty storefronts and too many churches. Yes.
Yeah.
Help.
I think that goes right along with what you were just saying about sort of making sure you market your assets. So if buses are one, if you're a beautiful sculpture garden and the green, those other things, making sure that people know that they can come downtown and you do have a safe, active space for them. I think that would also be helpful.
Yeah, I agree. And I think things like craft fairs really feel safe to people and encourage people to come in. And then hopefully they'll see, that'll encourage people to also visit the businesses that are downtown and enable things to, to pick back up. The too many churches downtown problem can be a challenge. We're starting to see, I think, adaptive reuse of churches into particularly residential buildings, and if they're historic facades that you can try to preserve those facades, you can see some interesting projects. Could you provide an example of public space design which is welcoming to the unhoused? It is a great question. Again, street furniture, chairs, benches that make people feel like they belong in a space, but also providing access to information about services for people. Perhaps if you have a downtown ambassadors type program, making sure that they have information to help people understand where your shelters are, where your feeding programs are, not to make people move out of the space, but to help people understand that they have access to support services. I think one of the challenging issues with unhoused folks can be when they have a lot of luggage or carts or gears. And I know that some places have tried to work on storage solutions. That's not something I'm super familiar with, but it is something that would be worth looking into. And I know we are at 11:59.
Yeah.
So I want to hand it back to
me,
Christine to wrap up.
Yes. Thank you, Celeste. That was a wonderful presentation. I'm sure we all enjoyed it. I am going to turn over to my screen here just for a few closing slides. So as you can see, our network extends throughout the state, and it includes professionally managed downtowns and neighborhood districts, municipal planning and economic development departments, and 2 regional organizations representing many interests of the towns. And so our members and also our network of professional affiliates for industry professionals, I know that they all work very hard on the issues that we talked about today. Our professional affiliates especially provide specialized expertise like the kind that you were talking about today to our communities relevant to downtown revitalization, preservation, economic and community development, real estate development, land use, transportation, marketing, and more. And I saw a couple of them on here today, like Marcia from Penn Globe. So thank you for joining us. Let's see, if you go to our website, ctmainstreet.org, you can find a list of our members, information about membership, our professional affiliates, and additional resources like our small business library that provides great business advice for our small merchants. I want to thank Celeste for this wonderful presentation today, and let everybody know that next month, our next webinar on tap will be in just a few weeks on the 9th, talking about something that is critical to making our downtowns thrive, volunteers. Speaker Ben Levinger is going to discuss strategies for maximizing volunteer efforts, giving constructive feedback, and more. And you can again find that on our website under events. Once again, I would like to thank all of our sponsors and program partners. I would like to thank Celeste and her team for today's presentation. I would also like to remind everybody that you will be receiving a email with a summary of today's presentation, along with links to the webinar recording and the presentation. And also remind you to please fill out the evaluation summary at the end to give us your feedback so we can work that into future programming, and remind you, if you are a planner, to make sure that you get your credit. So thank you, everyone. Have a great day. Take care.